This is the BioCentury Show.
Brought to you by BioCentury Grand Rounds. Join BioCentury this September in Amsterdam for the second Grand Rounds Europe, an R&D forum focused on translational science at the interface of industry and academia.
Hello and welcome to the BioCentury Show. I am Simone Fishburn, Vice President and Editor-in-Chief at BioCentury, and this is a special edition of the show brought to you from our Grand Rounds U.S. meeting in Seattle, where I sat down in a fireside chat with Chris Arendt, the CSO of Takeda. We discussed how Takeda is bringing AI into its R&D and its broader business, in and beyond the science, in a session titled This AI Moment, 2 Steps Forward and 1 Step Back. The session was recorded live and is followed by audience questions. Enjoy the show.
Good morning, everybody. So, one absolute pleasure to kick off the session with Chris Arendt, the CSO at Takeda. Absolute highlight for me to be able to have this, or continue, I should say, this conversation, right? We've been having this conversation for a little while, and I think that, in 2026, what better way to start the day than by talking about AI, right? I mean, I think that's the focus of what you and I will talk about. And based on our conversations, which sort of, as I said, sort of go back recently and a little bit further back than that, I really feel that we're in this era of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. I think there might be some people who put it the other way around. Yeah, 1 forward and 2 back, but we'll see. So, the reason I think about that, because I think that a lot of the discussion, especially at a place like Grand Rounds today, will be around how AI is used in discovery. But you're a pharma company. I think we all want to know, as operators and, running small and medium and different sizes businesses, how you're thinking about it even more broadly than just, I want to go broader than just discovery. So one of the things that we talked about was this idea that as you start to oversee and implement changes in how you do things with AI, each time you solve one thing, another thing comes up. So can you talk a little bit about how you're approaching it and how you see this playing out?
Wow, I love that we're starting with AI, and what an honor to be with you this morning for this discussion. I promise I'm not an AI agent, and I have not prepared through AI for this meeting. No, I think we're entering...
If you need to ask Claude the answer, you can do that.
Okay, yeah. I may need to. I've got him loaded up on my phone here. For me, I guess I would say for us at Takeda, it feels very much like we are entering a new era of drug development. I'd say in my 3 decades in the sciences, this is the most exciting time. This is, I think, potentially the biggest revolution that we're on the cusp of. And when I say the cusp, I mean, I think we've only seen 1% of the potential. And you're right, there is very much this sort of forward, backward momentum. I see, I could sort of triage a little bit into different cohorts in the current and the ongoing trials of AI. There's those who are really kind of just staying on the sidelines, maybe waiting for things to mature.
You mean individual people?
Yeah, or teams. Individuals and teams, staying on the sidelines. Others who are really just kind of implementing the more perfunctory stuff. Maybe that's the easy stuff to do first. AI as an administrative assistant in some ways, and that's great. And then there's the folks like us who just believe that this is existential for our industry now, to really embrace it and figure it out, to prototype now rather than waiting for the longer proof points. So to quickly answer the question, we can go into more details, but we're rebuilding our house. It's like doing a renovation while you're still trying to do everything else in your life. For us, still deliver high quality INDs while we completely rebuild everything about the model, actually. I would say everything.
Well, let's stay there for a minute. Let's dig into that. So, you still have to file INDs. You still have to keep everything else going along. So are you creating separate teams to do this? How are you going about it? And how do you, it's such a large organization. How are you, even just R&D is a huge organization, right? So how do you even think about a strategy, right, for that?
it's mind-blowing. I mean, it's kind of, I'll go back to the totally renovating your home strategy. Actually, I mean, Takeda's a 250-year-old company that we're now renovating. My home, personally, is 140 years old, and I know when I try to renovate it, it's really complicated, but you have to chunk it out. You know, you can kind of, so we kind of think about the capability stack, if you will, in different layers, and they all, each one of them involves steps forward and then many steps back, right? So you can't even start if you don't have the plumbing working in the house and the electrical. And for us, that's the data foundations. And it's obvious. But I'd say ever since I've been in industry, in big companies, we've been trying to do it and not getting it to where it needs to be, right? I mean, our labs, we have a lab footprint across Japan, Boston, many labs, many instruments. For this to work, we need for the power to be fully harnessed here, we need to really be able to retrofit our data systems so that we have the connectivity of every instrument in the lab. That's a different challenge than an AI native biotech that stands up in this year, right? It's a very different challenge. So we have to get the plumbing and electrical in. The next layer is the software stuff, right? The next is how you do your wet lab work. And the last I'd say is the talent in that stack. But you know what was really interesting as we start, so you're not, at least when we embarked, we knew it would be years towards getting those first two layers in, right? That data foundation piece, the software, the agentic AI, the apps, the models, the improvements in the models. That would be the work of years. And so we started to work also in that third space of the wet lab workflows to ready it, actually. And that was where, for us, a lot of the early wins were actually the steps forward. And it wasn't because of AI. It was because we were looking at all of our workflows to kind of proactively undo the bottlenecks. I would say, and I'm not exaggerating, we succeeded in actually condensing our discovery timelines, collapsing them in half, actually, because we pulled every functional head together to say, we just can't work this way anymore. The handoffs can't be like this, actually. The tech is too slow. Procurement has to work differently, by the way. We're still on a journey with some of this, but if it takes you 6 months to bring a new vendor on board, right, their technology could be obsolete by that time. So everything needs a reinvention.
So that actually brings me to my next question. I think you and I actually chatted at JP Morgan, right?
That's right.
So
we had a water cooler conversation.
A little water cooler conversation there. I was like, what's that, like 4 or 5 months ago, right?
Yep.
And I know that even in BioCentury, like our view on what we're doing and the world around us, I mean, everything has changed just massively even in that time, right? So how do you stay ahead? Like, as you said, 6 months, like the thing that you meant to do 6 months ago, you're like, oh, I don't want that tool anymore, I got a new one. So how do you stay ahead of that?
That is a tough one. I mean, because it's first of all, we need to stay on track, I'd say, in a big company. It's a different sort of sustainability challenge than a small company has. Both are very challenging, but for us, we need to continue to innovate every single year, by the way, and get the next TPP, as we discussed this morning, the next suite of them ready, right? So, I mean, that's first and foremost how we will be judged, right? What do we bring high quality opportunities forward in the clinic for patients? So I'd put that first, because that's where we are focused. And then the rest is a little bit of icing on the cake as I see it, actually. If we're investing for years in this build, this new model for R&D, and we succeed, I think for many others who don't do that or who kind of pilot it on the side, I think the challenge is the burden of entry, the activation threshold is going to be so high. So with that said, we are really taking apart our model of R&D, and I can unpack it more, but like changing our team structures and doing these things so again that we can kind of benefit today, but also be more prepared for that future.
So, I'm going to get to the teams thing actually. So, I forget, I think it's maybe 8 years ago, I can't exactly remember, but we wrote a story about Takeda, right? And I showed this to, Andy Plump, your colleague, your boss, I guess, maybe.
My boss
your
and mentor,
yeah,
for sure. Great
President of R&D, he kind of
our
like
hero.
this. The image that we had, like, covering the story was of this huge, like, ship tanker turning around, like, doing this turn, because it's very difficult to change a very big organization. And this was long before anyone was talking about, well, not anyone, but long before we were talking about AI. And so I really think that Takeda is in a very different place than it was, let's say, 10 years ago or whatever. You're in Cambridge, you've got really a lot of innovation going there, and now you've just said that you've got the next existential thing going. So is that, is it brought about through a culture of experimentation? How much do you do this top-down versus employee-driven sort of sandbox stuff?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think it's possible at the level of investment this requires to do this without the top-down endorsement and support. I guess
that's not the same as being directive.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. So you said experimentation. I mean, that's why we're here, right? We're the research team are the experimenters. We're not so afraid of new stuff. And I mean, we could be a little afraid of AI, of course, replacing our jobs or our expertise. But in fact, we're ready to prototype and experiment. We're hungry to do it. With that top-down guidance that says also guys, if you bring an exciting plan forward, we might invest in it. That just inspires us tremendously, right? So what's interesting about also the way budgets are managed, at least in our company, is that the research team kind of gets an envelope and we can kind of spend it to make the cake as we sort of see fit. Actually, that gives us a lot of autonomy because no one's managing how we do that, as a matter of fact. So then the ability to start to embed these new capabilities is a little bit higher for us, I'd say, than in other parts of the organization where financials work differently and also where there's just more regulation to begin with, right? That sort of constrains some of these experiments.
So can you talk a little bit now about, you talked about sort of processes, or procedures and using workflows, let's say, and using, greater efficiency, which, by the way, is something that one can do even without AI. It's just like re-examining workflows, right? But then there's the whole scientific side, right? So talk a little bit about, especially within R&D, where you expect to see your sort of, I don't know if they would be your first things. People always tell me if I ask them the first thing in AI, it's always going to be on document writing, how long it takes to write the INDs or whatever. But, where are you seeing the fruits of it really start to play out in R&D?
Yeah.
Or in research, if you prefer.
I'd say in many areas, maybe it's worth just to look at, for a moment, the problem statement we face, right, in terms of that mission we have to deliver sustainable, high-quality programs to the clinic. I mean, there's the cost of doing R&D today. It's only increasing, that headwind, right? The need to compete at speed. The need for technical robustness. If your assets fail because of technical issues, that's a biggest problem. And then translational robustness, right? I think so we are seeing where the progress can be made on all of these areas, right? And that has a massive value proposition. So I'll give you some, so certainly so take a step back. We're putting in place that data foundation so that we can build 200 AI-powered apps on top of it. They're much like iPhone apps in terms of being easy, user-friendly, and that's where I can give you some of the examples of the things we do. We can press an app, activate and by the way, it's our scientists designing these.
Right.
Like in a Tiger team with computational people, and sometimes with third parties like TetraScience who bring in and embed workers they call cyborgs. That is a really important part of the change kind of journey that we're on, is that really that embedding. But now we can press a button, in principle, download everything from CROs. So it's a CRO data integrator. That's so powerful. It saves our scientists so much time. We can do now our knowledge graphs around targets in an immensely more capable way. We can integrate risk assessments into that initially we didn't believe would be accurate. But our scientists go through, they still check and they fact check. They're amazingly accurate. We actually had our safety subject matter experts guide a multi-page prompt and a multi-agentic approach that allows us now to do the preliminary safety assessments before we start a program. So the whole space, safety space around the target, the biology, really at the press of the button. So doing one of these would normally take one of our talents, our SMEs, one entire week just to deliver one of them. Now that person can review 20 of them in a week. Like, we still do the review, but that gives us immense possibility. We're now using that to select bispecifics, design more complicated molecules, right? But now once you get into the wet lab workflows, as David Baker touched on yesterday, and these diffusion models and co-folding models, wow, mind-blowing. I mean, if you like, I can unpack some of the stuff we've been able to, that we're seeing there. And it's not to say everything is working or implemented, but it's game-changing.
So let's unpack it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, I'll give you one of the first examples for us is we worked with a large molecule AI company out of George Church's lab called Nabla. We had a protein. It was a large molecule, not an antibody, that was not developable. We'd actually brought it in through a partner. It's for myasthenia gravis. It's really an interesting mechanism. It's just not manufacturable, ultimately. Stability issues. We tried everything with rational design that we could. We failed. We were going to close the program. We said, let's give it to Nabla. And with their design capability, they were able to place de novo designed epitopes onto this that ultimately allow it to be, it gave us multiple candidates that we could now advance to the clinic. And so this program will enter the clinic, fingers crossed, very, very soon. And it was truly an example of a rescue by AI. Another example in the large protein design space, which is probably not remarkable to this group today, but a year ago, our head of biologics said in Takeda, as we were releasing a press release with a partner, just be careful to caveat, these claims about de novo antibody design. Let's not give the world the perspective that we believe we can press a button and get down to nanomolar designs de novo. Well, we're doing it today. We have proteins for which we have no structural data, multipass membrane proteins that you consider not druggable or have not been precedented to be drugged well. And in the first round of de novo design, which we still have to test in the lab ultimately, came up with multiple double-digit nanomolar binders to the extracellular domain of this protein. So those, what's so interesting there is these examples are not just about speed and cost, which we know can be, real important fruits. It's about moving better quality therapeutics and opportunities for patients. I think that is, for us and for me, the most exciting part around the hope for all of this is that we could actually have higher quality molecules moving forward or new mechanisms moving forward, more resilient ones. Our attrition is horrible in this industry. That's why we have the costs that we bear, right?
Okay, I have 4 questions that stem from the stuff you've just said. So I'm going to try and get to them, but I do want everybody to know I'm going to take questions in a few minutes. So start thinking of your own questions if you have them.
This episode of BioCentury This Week is brought to you by the second BioCentury Grand Rounds Europe in Amsterdam, September 23rd to 25th. The second edition of BioCentury Grand Rounds Europe convenes the leaders shaping the future of biopharma. This time we meet in Amsterdam, September 23rd to 25th, gathering academic innovators, biotech CEOs, pharma R&D leaders and investors to debate the translational science that will define the next decade. Grand Rounds Europe focuses on what matters most: breakthrough biology, transformative technologies, and how to make early-stage R&D investable. Grand Rounds is where rigorous science meets real-world execution. Join BioCentury and regional host chairs Forbion and BGV and take a deep dive on translational opportunities in the Benelux region. BioCentury Grand Rounds Europe, where discovery moves toward impact. Register at biocenturygrandrounds.com.
So let's go back to something you said a minute ago, and in the context of what you've just been talking about. In any organization, let alone a pharma-sized one, right, you're going to have faster and slower adopters, and you're going to have different views of risk. So how, it seems that you're sending a very strong message that you are AI friendly, presumably with certain guardrails and so on. Let's stipulate to that. But what does that mean? If you're not a fast adopter, your history, how's that playing out among your team? You might have great people who just aren't very good.
There's a lot of heterogeneity on the one hand, but then we are the team of experimenters. I was recently in Japan meeting with our kind of mid-level lab staff and just asking them for examples of how they're applying these technologies. It was mind-blowing. Actually, it was some things we hadn't thought of doing, in Boston. So I think there is a hunger. There's also a fear. I think two things come to mind that have really helped us a lot. One is these kind of forming these tiger teams, we call them, that have like the computational people, the dry lab expertise married into the structures, the team structures of the wet lab. You could say that's not different than how we did comp chem or whatever. We always had that. My experience was the comp people sat in a dark room somewhere in the back of the site, and then you have to go down dark hallways to find them. I'm exaggerating, but now that it's true, and it's really embedding, and this third-party embedding is a part of it. The other one is building a new team model structure. So we have something we just kicked off that we call the AI Research Accelerator, and the idea is that these small teams and pods would prosecute a small portfolio, 2 or 3 large molecule or small molecule programs that, number one, could benefit a lot from AI. So the team has a lead AI person, computational support for chemistry, et cetera, and could be enabled through CROs. So this is initially an externalized model, just so it doesn't get in the way of our other I&D deliverables. And the idea is we believe we could move from project start to candidates in about a year, maybe a little bit more than that. That's the goal for these programs. And they're really small teams. They're unplugged from all the functional governances. They can use consultants if they want. They can consult internally. This is also not a new model. I think what's, for industry to play with, I think what's new is embedding the tiger team component and seeing how that can work. And that's how so that is how, it is really, I think to bring people along, they have to use it. They have to have the exposure to it. And that is actually everyone wants to sign up for this model because we've opened up job, openings for it. So there's immense interest in jumping into this.
So let me now take that to sort of a leadership level because the opportunity to steward this, like as the head of research, is very different than doing it with the sort of title AI leader, right? And I think that's a sort of distinction. But so a couple of questions here. One is it also suggests that you and your peer leaders, right, who grew up in biology, need to gain expertise in a completely different area than you're trained in, right? And so the other part of that is when we did, actually it was a back to school we did a few years back, and one of the sort of sentiments that came through was that the next generation of sort of pharma leaders or big biotech leaders will not be people trained in biology, but will be sort of people, mathematicians or whatever. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit to that. Like, are the biologists going to stay in charge but just have to gain expertise somewhere else, or will we see talent and senior talent coming in from completely different parts?
There's a lot of interesting things to unpack in what you just said, Simone. I mean, one is just that paradox that we're rolling out these kinds of new, like an unprecedented model. We're not following a roadmap. Every company big company is doing this differently. No one's right or wrong yet. We'll see over time. But the people guiding it, like myself and other great colleagues, brilliant colleagues, none of us have a background in this, actually. We have full-time jobs already.
It's like being a parent, you're just winging it,
And we're not digital natives, right? I mean, and there is a learning curve on all of these things. So of course we have to, so building in some of the disciplines that you've touched on, including the computational gurus, is a big part of enabling that journey for sure. I think that so I think the future kind of skill set is one that probably is more versatile, where that wet and there's new skills at that interface of the wet and the dry, because I think you still will really need both. The scientist is the loop, in my opinion, my view. It is not in the loop. It is the loop. Those insights are driving the development of the models, actually, which need to keep being improved, the insights and so on. But the computational skill set is also part of that. So the marriage there will be an interesting one to follow. I think, I think the model moves also towards more automation capabilities. That's another thing we're building and really investing in. And we're putting hundreds of millions of dollars into it. And the way we're doing it is not by putting it somewhere else to be run by a team that's there. it's literally going into our labs, And so I think over time, we'll still need brilliant drug hunters, but they'll be complemented by this kind of suite of new kind of tech-savvy, automation-savvy scientists who get to spend time doing what their job description says, actually, because most of our job descriptions in science today don't tell you that you're going to spend 50% of your time chasing down information, doing a search and rescue mission just to find across like thousands of instruments and like project team things, the latest data. So I think you can paint a dystopian picture of that. I think it's much more inspiring. And I think, again, that hope for patients that ultimately our molecules will come forward with better insights, better designs and resiliency. Like that's the industry I want to be in, not the one where like most things fail even after they get to phase 1.
Right. So I will come back to that point in a minute. But I think that, to be honest, we're going to also be raising a generation of the next scientists who will be completely fluent in this. And so it won't really be are you a biologist or a data person? You'll have grown up with that. And, a couple of years ago, I spoke to Krishna at Google Ventures GV, and, I was asking him whether, whether their expectation now, and I'm going to come to a question in a minute, but whether their expectation is that biotechs will have to have sort of an AI basis in them. And he said to me, to me, that question is like the equivalent, and soon will be the equivalent of asking if they need email. So it's sort of becoming a sort of I don't know if it's table stakes, it's just sort of becoming part of the core. So now I want to just ask a question, because I will take questions from the audience in a minute. Here we are, this academia-industry interface, and you have, like many companies, I don't even know, how they compete with your capabilities, right? But I think, we do know that a lot of the innovation that is making its way in pharma is actually coming from outside of the pharmas, obviously from external innovation. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your expectations, not only of how this changes discovery, which you've talked a little bit about, but the nature of alliances and the way that you're looking at opportunities that come to you.
I mean, first of all, I want to acknowledge just how important this frontier science that so many in the room drive is to what we're doing. I don't think, I don't want to give the impression AI is like it's going to overtake that. It can't, actually. And it is, well, as you said, Simone, it's going to become commoditized, part of it. Although it's, as a tool, it's a tool that if we really embrace, it will be a co-creator with us, which is different than many things that have become commoditized. And that's where I think there's still differences in understanding and opinion. But that said, how does it change our partnerships view? It doesn't really fundamentally change how we think about partners. Actually, the pioneers, the people bringing the new sparks around, like what we saw from David Baker yesterday, right? Unlocking new modality spaces, brand new therapeutic opportunities is huge. I think the translational insights, so the Allen Institute and the announcements, the amazing investments coming in to support translational, it represents addressing a huge gap, actually, and the models can't fix that, right? And neither the computational models nor the mouse models are going to allow us to have the right level of insights to addressing that attrition in the clinic. All the wasted patients, if you look at it that way. So that's a place where I think, strong insight. And so I think what I'd like to see change a little bit, I guess, and it's more of a ecosystem change, is how we partner. I'd like to see us still advance further towards more embedding in between, and what you guys are doing here is it's a microcosm for that, really, that embedding in a cross-disciplinary way. Secondly, being more versatile in sharing data. I think, we talk about the security issues, they're real, but the ability to federate data in a consortium model like the one we entered with OpenFold and many other pharmas brings in the training brain to our Takeda ecosystem, trains it and sends it back out without any of our data. How can we do that with academics and like hospitals and more pharmas? How can this community also help us catalyze that? Because I may not catalyze it in my day job, but if I see it sort of brilliant teams and leaders out in this ecosystem doing it, I'll come on board for sure. So I'd like to see more of that as well. And then maybe the last piece is negative data. We all create so much negative data, actually, and it's the most important data we could have to train AI. So I don't know what the solution is to that exactly, but I think if we could think together how we could, where that how that could be leveraged. I guess that's something more at the institute level to think about, because, and the pharma level, where we have just massive amounts of such information.
Well, we are big, BioCentury, we're big fans of negative data, by the way. So can I see, are there questions from the audience? Okay, we have one over here.
Thanks. I think we're all with you in AI's ability to improve compound discovery and preclinical development. How does Takeda think about improving the success rate of clinical development, or shortening the time, or reducing the cost?
You know, it's something I'd say that still is a bit of a work in progress within Takeda. We're using AI systems more to like manage recruitment and patient selection, right? For example, I think to do more automated document writing. These are real, have real impacts. But I think there's still a lot more. There's a lot of opportunity to automate certain types of clinical data assessments successfully, or at least a good part of the way, to pull in data in a more kind of informed way and so on, to run models, actually to use your clinical data to also inform preclinical models in a more agile manner to develop the next generation of medicine. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. It is harder. I think you almost multiply the complexities I just discussed times probably like a log order, because now you're working with many, many different functions. There's all that issue that you've raised around sort of digital maturity of our cells. Then there's the regulated nature of that environment. So and the fragmentation, which is different across all the sites, geographies, and so on, and centers. So there's a lot of challenge there, but a lot of opportunity for sure.
Thanks.
We got another question. Okay, it's Rachel, right?
Oh, yeah. Hi, Chris. Thanks so much. Rachel Stein from the Hutch. A quick question on how you're thinking about balancing encouraging AI utilization and adoption internally with thinking about line items and budgetary costs of that computational power. And there's been a lot of recent articles about how different groups are thinking about balancing those two things.
It's a great question. I feel like I need to start investing in energy. Maybe you can get ahead of the curve, but I think we don't fully know what that's going to be. We're trying to get an assessment of like what the investment in compute is to achieve different sort of outcomes, right? Interestingly, there was recently a serious request in Takeda to register some of our agents in our Workday employment system so that they could get, I think, access to certain suites of things, which gives us maybe it's a joke in a way.
Like an org chart with like.
It is an org chart, and I'd like to know what that part costs, and what its productivity is. So I think we need more data still to answer that question. I think the preliminary view of it is, however, that there's a high ROI to this. Once you get through that initial investment, right? We're seeing this in the world of the hyperscalers in the tech industry. There's such a kind of initial bolus of investment that is needed. But once you're through that, I think the energy costs and so on, will be manageable in terms of the outputs. But that initial investment for us is represented in hundreds of millions of dollars, to be clear, just on the research side.
I think we have a question here, yeah?
Hi, I'm Aishwarya Chandra from the Allen Institute. And I'm one of the people that works with these AI tools day in and day out quite extensively as an analyst. One of the issues that I've been seeing with adopting AI or promoting use of AI is stochasticity in results, as well as like the sycophantic nature of these models, like being super positive in whatever they're suggesting. And there's also like an issue of rabbit holing, because you're kind of like stuck in this loop of interacting with something that doesn't get tired. Mm-hmm. So I guess I'd love to know your thoughts, similar to like the cost question. How do you quantify the time cost that's maybe even lost to this process?
Ooh, that's interesting, because there have been studies that have actually captured that level of time loss. So very counterintuitive that these sort of accelerators would lead to that kind of issue, the burn rate or issue. I guess I would kind of triage it into more the kind of knowledge space where there is this issue that's very real versus the kind of molecular design space where, at the end of the day, you kind of have a ability to calculate based on your wet lab data and calibrate the accuracy of the models, continue to feed the algorithm and decide if it's useful in kind of in flight or not. It's in the space where you're interrogating biology and kind of things, picking targets, solutioning where those worries arise. And I don't think we've totally solved it, but what we have, there's several kind of guardrails you can put on it in terms of traceability of theses is, that's one piece. The other is using a multi-agentic approach. So when I referred to that safety assessment, what we found, it was an iterative process with, for us to keep improving on it. And ultimately the best outcome was achieved when we had a fact checker built in, and actually also had a scoring algorithm around the veracity of data. So, because sometimes you have one publication that's not in a good journal that makes a thesis versus one that's, many publications in top journals. So I think we need to calibrate the quality of information, and we can use AI for that as well.
I think we have another question over here, yeah?
Hi, Chris. Ryan Myers with a startup out of the University of Chicago. Curious to get your opinion on how, from a large pharma perspective, you look from a search and evaluation side at early stage technologies and how they incorporate AI, and whether you think that there's going to become an expectation, especially for platform technologies, to capture their early data in some kind of AI training as you look at acquisitions and partnerships, and how you would value that.
Maybe this is a chance for me to give a shout out to two of our business development colleagues. So Mike and Ross are here from Takeda, by the way. So thanks for joining. And they're helping to look at in this space of the kind of the next frontiers. In terms of how are we thinking about it, I think, so because we're trying to build that end-to-end internal capability around these technologies, what's a little less interesting to us is to pilot in a totally remote way these new technologies. So the more interesting partners are the ones that let either embed in some level, sharing the data, sharing some of their models at least, right? Even coming on our site and embedding. I think that's where some of the real interesting magic happens, in fact, for us as we're going through this. So, and if not, then at least having immense transparency into the kind of operating model of the partner who's more AI enabled, so that we can learn from that and become more efficient. That's what we want. So I think we're not just thinking of one-off value from a partnership or just a narrow field of value. For us, it's about how does it like help us build upon this capability set within Takeda while respecting the goals of partners well.
Is there another question? Okay. We're actually almost out of time, so I'm going to end with a question at a slightly higher level, going back to sort of what you talked about in terms of the drug development paradigm. The idea, of course, is that this reduces cycle time, right? That overall, the time from discovery to creating a drug goes down. Ideally, the costs do too. So two things. Is it changing how you're thinking about probability of success when you model what you do from the beginning? And two, are you going to charge less for drugs as a result?
Well. You have to bring in some other Takeda gurus to take that hot potato, I guess. I mean, I hope, actually, it's a serious question, I think, because, I mean, this is why, it's existential, I think, where we are. And that's another whole panel discussion. And I couldn't agree more that we need to lower the costs. And I think most across pharma would agree as well. But there's many things to fix, one of which is the attrition rate of the programs.
That's where I come to probability of success.
That's it. Yeah. I think, look at how you can measure that. We can measure, right? We can measure it across modalities, and we can measure speed with that as well. Speed is very important. Like, we cannot design forever molecules. And I think that ability to do more in silico prediction and design, including around ADMET properties, by the way, right, gives us the ability to triage earlier out the ones that are not good, the ones that are more not resilient. And I think that I can measure like better molecules coming out. I can't yet tell you that they'll become approved products at a higher rate. That's a multi-decade proof kind of thesis. But I think if we can chip away at attrition at all of these stages, right, we will have a very meaningful impact in aggregate.
So you anticipate being able to sort of talk about recalculating, let's say, probability of success into phase 1 or from phase 1, at the various stages along the pathway?
For sure. We started by recalculating our cost of INDs. An IND is not a great metric because it can be a high quality one or a low quality one. And we find it...
I'm shocked that you would have any low quality.
Well, we have to be careful not to get trapped in bean counting, right? And we kind of compare that even to the lowest costs in the world, like China, right? And we think about how these new capabilities, more automation, can drive that down and so on. But then there's the piece of the kind of success rates on those, right? And success leading up to that point. Frankly, the lowering of the cost of INDs is happening by reducing attrition and increasing speed in the preclinical. It is that clinical part, though, that still is where most of the brutal attrition is happening, where patients are also engaged in our therapeutic molecules, and we have to address it. And I think that translational space and how do we bring these technologies to bear there represents a really important area of focus for us and needs to be going forward.
All right. Well, this has been a great conversation. Please join me in thanking Chris. Very good. And
thank you so much. Yeah, it's an honor to be here.
Brought to you by BioCentury Grand Rounds. Join BioCentury this September in Amsterdam for the second Grand Rounds Europe, an R&D forum focused on translational science at the interface of industry and academia.
Kendall Square Orchestra provides the music for the BioCentury show. The group connects science and technology professionals and other members of the greater Boston community to collaborate, innovate, and inspire through music while supporting causes related to healthcare and education.